I like to say it's the difference between the way a tree works and the way a spider web works.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today is Thursday, May 18th, 2023. I'm Eric Planey.
I am Lucas Finco.
I'm Megan Grant.
And I'm Kyle Fleming.
And together, I mean, really, for the first time, we can say this emphatically, we really are the pirates of the Caribbean clean tech. Yar!
Yar!
This is like the most appropriate, and by the way, those are great yars, really.
It's good. Yeah.
This is like one of the most appropriate guests we've had for the title of our little old podcast. This is so exciting. So I think anyone who listened to the last episode, obviously I had the great pleasure of being on vacation with my wife. We did a half remote broadcast where I was in St. Croix. Lucas was at the world headquarters in New Jersey. And we started talking about the trials and tribulations associated with power in the Caribbean, and specifically the Virgin Islands and also Puerto Rico. And just really wanted to give credit here because while I was in St. Croix, I reached out to the Virgin Islands Energy Office, and I even made some phone calls because I really wanted to see if we can get you guys as a guest. And I was happy. And you guys didn't pick up the phone, but for all the right reasons, because you were, I think, in the middle of a ribbon cutting of a resiliency center, which we'll talk about in a minute. So you guys responded to me the next day. It was great. And your attitude about wanting to be on the podcast is something we so appreciate. So we really want to say welcome to both of you, Kyle and Megan.
Thanks.
Thank you for having us.
Anytime. So why don't we just go right into it, because we got a lot to talk about. And I'll start off with the lead question, if you don't mind, Lucas. But so Megan and Kyle, tell us a little bit about yourselves. Tell us, a little bit of your background and how you ended up working at the Virgin Islands Energy Office.
I was born and raised in St. Croix. I just sort of liked chemistry. I decided I wanted to be a chemical engineer because, in my words, I did not want to be stuck in a lab for my entire life. And that's why I didn't go into chemistry in general. But I remember I first was interested in clean tech when I was on an airplane. It was my junior year of high school. I was on an airplane going somewhere, and I was reading this American Way, the in-flight magazine, and they had this article on algae fueled biodiesel, and and turning that into, and this was like a number of years ago. So, but I was like, this is amazing. And I was hooked ever since. And so, yeah, it's just been clean tech for me ever since then, like trying to find an in the industry, trying to figure out where I was going to fit in. And I think, trying to find my place.
So before you go, Kyle, I have to say my brother and sister-in-law worked for American Airlines. And my brother at a different airlines used to be responsible for the in-flight magazine content. So he's going to be ecstatic to hear that your journey started with an in-flight magazine. So, Kyle, how about yourself?
Yeah, so for me, I kind of started my thought process around getting into the energy space. Really was kind of the precursor, and really it was based on trying to look at ways we could affect the energy challenges here in the Caribbean. I think we all, not just exclusive to the Virgin Islands, all islands, have the challenge of operating independently and all the challenges that come with being in a vulnerable hurricane heavy zone as well. And so there was always the challenges that needed to be overcome. And so when I started my academic career, when trying to figure out where I'd want to shift my focus, I know I was going to be in a technical space and engineering space. But it felt appropriate to kind of align with, I think, a skill set that I knew was going to be valuable in the Caribbean, very specifically in the Virgin Islands, as much as the needs were there. And so that kind of started with minoring in energy in my undergrad. And then when I went into grad school, I took that further. I got a master's in energy systems, worked through the startup battery manufacturing or energy storage manufacturing space for a number of years before getting into the renewable solar development within the Caribbean region in a private side. And after about 8 years or so, kind of private sector work in the energy space, made the transition to the government sector, the public sector, in 2019 with the administration here. And so it's been trying to take a holistic approach to the energy area, both from the private and public sector.
That's very cool. Very cool. Lucas, over to you.
Yeah, I was hoping you could give us a little background on the Virgin Islands Energy Office, maybe a little bit of its history and maybe what its mission is, and has that mission evolved?
Yeah, so it's certainly, in terms of the history, I guess one of the interesting parts of its history is we're currently under the governor's office now, but it hasn't always been the case. At times we're under our Department of Planning and Natural Resources division. I think at one point we were under maybe even Public Works as well. So our agency has moved around, and this is over the span of probably about 30 years. But its most recent iteration has been under the governor's office, which works well from a policy standpoint as well, in terms of kind of keeping the connection between the energy agenda, which is always at the forefront of any Virgin Islands leader's mind. And really, if we look at our mission, it covers a lot of wide bases, but the way I like to describe it is we're really the facilitator at its core of a number of federal resources that are intended to affect the energy space. So whether it be the Department of Energy, Department of Interior, even at times the Department of Agriculture in certain areas, we're the administrator of those funds. So even if we look at the Infrastructure and Investments Job Act, a lot of those bolstered funding sources relative to energy are funneled through our agency. And overall, our goal in administering these funds is to promote energy efficiency, promote renewable energy, develop energy policies, and really grow the industry from an energy standpoint, especially as it pertains to its ability to reduce the energy burden that is really at the core of everyone's lifestyle here in the territory. Yeah,
I would say that from the inception, the only thing that's really changed is what like policies or what new things are coming out, new technologies, new solutions. But the goal and the mission of the Energy Office has always been to move the territory forwards into more resilience, more clean energy, and more efficiency.
Well, what I like is you guys are touching on words that I think are not at the forefront of clean energy conversation in America on the mainland, which is efficiency and resiliency. Energy efficiency is really the low-hanging fruit. And we seem not to be talking about that very often. We keep kind of driving the agenda forward with, new capacity for renewable energy generation. But efficiency, I think, has to be tackled. And we don't seem to really put that on the floor. It's not sexy. So I don't think we're talking about it as much as we should be. But on an island economy, especially in the Caribbean, it really makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's that part in terms of where it really comes down to like the impact, right? So when we look at our electricity rates here, which are, in excess of 40 cents per kilowatt hour, the value of efficiency improvements, whether it's going from an electric water heater to a solar water heater, or going from an electric water heater to a heat pump water heater, it's, while the technology might not be as sexy, the cost savings will get anybody excited. And I think that's where efficiency kind of becomes a more heightened and a more common talking point here, because it does have really significant and tangible cost saving effects here.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the S word, and that's a great dovetail to the next question on the list, which is, I think if you go to the average American citizen living in the Midwest, where I'm from, or who goes to the vacation in the Caribbean once a year, if you were to survey them and say, what probably powers the lights in the Virgin Islands, in Puerto Rico, and the Caribbean, I would guarantee you everyone says, oh, I'm sure it's solar because of all the sun, solar. But when you actually look at the statistics and the legacy, your power generation really is coming from a surprising source, right? Why don't you guys talk a little bit about the history of power generation from, fuel oil and diesel and propane, how that kind of came about, if you guys can give a little background, and where do you think that's heading going forward? Because it just doesn't seem as logical given today's technologies.
Yeah, so when we look at, for us, and this is, until about 7 years ago, we were exclusively diesel fired power generation, and very common practice across the Caribbean region, at least on the smaller islands. Some of the larger ones, the Puerto Rico, Santo Domingo, Cuba, I mean, they've leveraged some other sources they could support. Some of them even had even some coal facilities out there. You've seen different type of generation on those larger islands, but on these smaller islands, diesel was easily transportable, relatively abundantly available from the US market, and then even from other markets as well. And you didn't need as much infrastructure to support the fuel delivery to the generators. So it was a really easy distributed type of approach to energy for small islands, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Propane has really come about for us as a more cost-effective fuel, just on its base commodity value. Even though, like, as any fuel commodity, it changes quickly, as we saw last year, it ballooned up, and we certainly are still feeling some of the effects of that. But it's certainly been our approach here locally to try to diversify. You don't see it as common as across the chain. You don't see propane as a standard as much as diesel is standardized across the chain of islands. It was a decision that we made in 2012 was about the time when we started seeking out an alternative, because that's when our electricity rates were over 55 cents a kilowatt hour. There was a lot of desperation to try to find an alternative option to our sole diesel reliance or a dependency for our power generation needs. And so we started that process of looking into what would be next. Here we are in 2023, though, and I think that that evolution is happening again, right? While we're still mainly on propane, and that's still the lowest cost option compared to diesel. I think we're starting to see more and more of the thought process of like what the next 10 to 15 years could be, renewables being a very key part of that mix. But it's also kind of leaving ourselves open to what the next advancement in technology. I think hydrogen is something we are I feel like it's at its nascent period now, but just looking at the way things quickly evolve here, there may be another fuel source for us here that is more locally attainable that could be the next transition. So I think ultimately at the end of the day, the closer we can get our energy sources closer within our reach is really the key. And so shifting away from those imported commodities is going to be critical to enabling that.
Yeah.
And I think that an important part is that, something that I didn't realize until I started this job, and I think a lot of people don't really think about, is utility design is very complicated. And you can't, everybody knows that, solar produces energy during the day and then not at night. And they sort of forget that side, even though it seems obvious. You just don't really think about, like, yes, we also need energy at night. And even 7 years ago, the options for utility scale storage and energy storage were not really there. And they were not in a place where the islands, we felt comfortable moving forward with that. And there's also the idea that, when people want to set up a solar field in the States, you want to set up something that's like 20 megawatts, 50 megawatts, and that is splashy and sexy, distribution system for that utility, it might be only 5-10% of the energy that it's distributing, whereas for us, that would be like 80% of the island.
Right.
And you can't put all of that on solar without, a lot of planning and remodeling of the distribution system.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways that I always like to try to get people to understand is, I think the difference between someone who's maybe looking at just putting grid-tied solar on their home for energy savings versus trying to run their home 100% off-grid on solar and battery, right? It's not that, we need to maybe just double our solar system. It could be tripling or quadrupling, because you're trying to design for the worst case scenario, where maybe you don't have, a solar resource for days. And if you try to extrapolate that to the utility scale, so you got to think of how much redundancy they would have to build in to allow for solar to be that primary coverage. again, there's always a number, there's always an economic number, but it's also just a different level of thought. And I think sometimes people sometimes oversimplify that, like, solar just makes sense, but when we're on an islanded grid and we have to, everything we produce is required to sustain our electrical operation. There's just a lot of thoughts that have to come in that kind of confined grid that we operate within.
I mean, and even with the solar microgrid that you mentioned earlier, that even comes with, the backup to the battery backup is a generator, a diesel generator, just in case, so you definitely can't put all of your solar eggs or your energy eggs in one generation basket. I may have lost the
We're totally with you. We're totally with you.
I think energy eggs in one basket might be a name of a spin-off podcast, Megan.
Yeah, we want production rights. We want production rights.
Well, that brings up an interesting point for me too, is that a lot of clean energy planning in the States takes advantage of large geographic diversities. So we have deserts in the Southwest. We have a lot of rainfall and elevation change in the Northeast. And so we're able to benefit from different climate zones. And, so our big struggle is to build transmission lines in the US. You don't have that on a tiny island, right? So it may present some interesting challenges I haven't thought about. I mean, how do you tackle it? Because now you have to have everything in one tiny island and it's one little ecosystem, right?
Yeah, you have, and I think that's where, even on I think that's one of the things that we try to communicate even at our cost level, right? When we try to think of like, what is the cost of having to manage a totally isolated system, where if you don't have your redundancy built into that mix, you don't have access to it, right? It's not like, okay, this system's down, so we could call on this generation out in West Virginia, they're still connected to this larger grid. Somebody else, if we have a car that hits a telephone line or a power line, that can trigger a significant outage and there's not a redundant line that's running through another service territory that could pick up the slack in that interim period. So, I mean, overall, we're more vulnerable, right? I think that's kind of like the key, and it's, not just vulnerable to hurricanes, but we're more vulnerable to even daily disruptions. And so that does bring a different level of kind of system planning and, strategic investments to how you try to mitigate those disruptions, also get people to understand that we're never going to be, it's going to be very difficult for us to be as resilient as these larger interconnected systems. Not to say that we should just be satisfied with, poor reliability, but also understand the application in which we're trying to operate within. So that at least the frustrations aren't because of someone's mishandling, it's just because of technical limitations that we have.
For some of your listeners who may not, be as familiar with how transmission and distribution works, I like to say it's the difference between the way a tree works and the way a spider web works. Like, I would say that the national transmission and distribution system is like a spider web, where everything is sort of has redundancies and it's connected to other lines. So if that line breaks in the middle of the spider web, whatever's connected to that spider web can figure out, access from other places. Whereas if you're talking about a tree, if one of like the main trunks of the tree or the main limbs of the tree falls off, there's nothing to keep the rest of that fruit on the tree. It's just, you got to get that limb back up, so to speak.
So you would put a bias towards like distributed generation, right? Because if it's evenly distributed amongst the load, then you don't necessarily, if a line goes down, it might not be the end of the world, right?
Right, definitely.
Yeah. And I would say further, I think, that's been one of the things that we've, both from the energy office standpoint and also in terms of the trying to get the utility to transition a bit more, because we've definitely had, even given our small size, we've definitely been historically to now has been a very much so centralized generation type of operation. And 20 years ago, 25 years ago, we all know the distributed access maybe wasn't as financially available or even technically available, and then also financially restrictive. fast forward to present day, we certainly have the opportunity to look at bringing generation closer to the actual demand sources, which certainly simplifies some of that, that web of complication that we would otherwise have to deal with. And so getting generation through distributed sources. I mean, myself and Megan could talk through what we've seen on the solar and storage growth in the territory, which is profound, both at the residential and commercial level, especially the solar and storage at the residential level, as well as
completely understandable reasons. There was a major hurricane that knocked out power for 3-4 months at the maximum. So yeah.
Well, let me, no, I was just going to say, you guys are kind of talking to an issue that was ready to ask, and we're kind of going off our question list, but I love the way this conversation is trending. If this were Christmas and you guys had all the capital in the world, all the, just resources out the wazoo, how would you guys build both a system that is both has redundancy and resiliency? Would everybody have distributed energy, solar and battery at the residential source, at the building source? But also, would you guys then migrate to a centralized system for a primary source of power? Like, how would you guys, if you had the ideal wish list on how you could set up power generation in the island economy, where would you start and what would you like? How would you take it?
The first thing I would do is tear down the distribution system and bury every single line.
Right.
That is probably the first thing that I would do. There's no more, oh, this guy got drunk and hit and hit a power line, and now my entire neighborhood is dark for an hour. Then I would probably go with not necessarily every home having its own system, although homes having their own systems is fine, but certainly I might break it down to like the neighborhood or the quarter level. I mean, on St. Croix we have what are called quarters. So there's like, I mean, they've split the island into like essentially 6 different sections. So, maybe down to that level where it was more like the states where you have multiple distribution sites spread out throughout the islands, and then a transmission system that was not stemming from one central point, but rather just sort of very interconnected.
Yeah, I think I would definitely agree on the bearing of the lines. I mean, I think it's an undertaking that we've started in kind of small sections across the feeder, but I think at the end of the day, with our hurricane exposure and our windstorm exposure overall, I think that's definitely a key transition. There are some islands, one island in particular, St. Martin, which isn't too far from here. They were one island that I've been to that's been very aggressive on their undergrounding, and a lot of their circuits are buried, and the proof is in the pudding. After the 2017 storms, I think they were re-energized, and they got a direct eye wall hit from a Category 5, and had significant sections of the island back up and energized within 2 weeks following that event.
Wow.
And so it's definitely a, you talk about an infinite pocketbook. That's really the only way you can have those conversations, or we could have those conversations, but that would certainly be a strategy. I think for sure that the regional distribution, I agree on that as well too. Overall, I mean, also the utility, I like to, you're in the Northeast, I think of Green Mountain Power almost every other day as the type of model utility that we here in the Caribbean, especially as a small island nation, can emulate very effectively. I think especially, they've certainly embraced aspects of that distributed customer level, energy service, through battery programs that they've enabled that, create utility assets behind the meter, at homes. I think that's something that we can meet the appetite of our community, because the community clearly wants that resiliency, that assurance and power availability. That's very difficult to do at the current grid structure. So working on getting that closer to the home level, I think and being more customer facing and being more of a energy service provider in that way, instead of being kind of a power plant operator, which is what we've been historically, would certainly be, I think, a valuable approach for us to shift to if we had the resources to support that type of transition.
I mean, I agree. I don't know, Lucas, how you feel, but for example, when you're in California and people are putting solar with a battery, they're not doing it to be green. They're doing it because they're tired of all the wildfires and mudslides just killing the grid. And the grid's just not holding up. So I think personally redundancy is what has to get built in, and I think it has to be priced in somehow. So and your idea of a microgrid, I like. It happened in New York City. There's neighborhoods that were really damaged by Hurricane Sandy or Superstorm Sandy, and the neighborhoods took it in their own hands, and they've built microgrids like Red Hook in Brooklyn. For neighborhoods, I think these are great ideas, and they really have to be brought to the forefront. Obviously, when I was in St. Croix, and we mentioned this, you guys, it was just great news that you were dedicating a resiliency center. I believe it was a school that I think was getting, storage and battery. And it just seems like, are you seeing more funding available for you guys to build, to build out like resiliency centers that are for the public good, centers maybe that are used as shelters, et cetera. So maybe since we've talked a little bit about resiliency and redundancy, maybe the question migrates to talking about funding sources, because in America, we're all coming, sorry, I keep saying in America, like you're not America. But on the mainland, obviously, everyone keeps talking about Biden's Inflation Reduction Act and this money flowing into just great clean energy projects, et cetera. Are you feeling the same, and are you seeing the same funding windfall coming to the island economies in the U.S. Virgin Islands? And if so, like where the priorities are going? Are they going towards, these resiliency centers that you guys are working on right now?
So there's definitely there was 100% increase in the funding opportunities available for these type of strategic investments. Just actually, while I think it was in April, in partnership with the Department of Education here, I submitted a grant application for $14 million for solar and battery at 4 schools that are going to be under reconstruction over the next few years. This is part of the DOE has a Renew Public Schools K through 12 program, and this is 100% under the Investment and Infrastructure Jobs Act, or the IRA funding, and that's just one funding source that's been identified for a very specific area of that type of investment. But ultimately, we're seeing it come from a lot of different areas. As the Energy Office, we administer again much of the DOE funds and DOI, and even the Department of Transportation for the charging infrastructure build out as well. So just about every sector of funds that's available, there's availability for us here in the U.S. territories, not just the Virgin Islands, like I said, even through the Pacific territories as well. I think for us, the bigger challenges is the coordination of all of these funds, right? Like getting this many dollars is great, but all of them have various prerequisites, application processes, planning and coordination. And I think one of the challenges we've experienced is trying to take on all these different opportunities simultaneously when they all have their own, different areas of need and prerequisite support. But it's a great problem to have, because ultimately the intent of the dollars is to push some of the established agendas we've had in the microgrid development, in more distributed generation, in transportation electrification. So it's just about being strategic about how we bring them all together.
No, well, listen, it's great to see that you guys are getting these opportunities, and it sounds like you're kind of dealing with the same set of bureaucracies, if you will, or red tape that a lot of agencies on the local level are dealing with. How to make sure the boxes are checked correctly. I don't know anything about that at my clean tech startup.
Actually, what I've found is that NASEO, the National Association of State Energy Offices, has been an invaluable resource in figuring out, in sort of discussing that red tape. They don't necessarily have the same red tape issues that we have, but they do deal with it. So like talking with them about how they deal with it, and sort of all of the options for all of the solutions that you can come up with. They're very unique solutions. I mean, to the point where we were even discussing with Tennessee in I think it's the IIJA funding. There is a certain block of money for energy auditor training, and so we had discussed with the Energy Office of Tennessee, I believe, I really hope I get that right. That, you know, like possibly doing a partnership with them on this training, this energy auditor training. You know, we can just sort of send people up there, or better yet, they can send their people down here. I'm sure they would love that.
Yeah, I would sign up for sure.
Yeah, you know, so I think that definitely, you know, and then also we take lessons from Hawaii a lot, certainly in terms of red tape. Well, not so much in terms of red tape, but certainly in terms of dealing with an island economy and the struggles of being a completely self-contained
Right.
area.
A lot of overlapping similarities, I'm sure.
Mhm.
So
Definitely.
Just to pivot a little bit, a lot of our listeners are starting their careers or trying to plan their career in clean energy. I was wondering if you could give some advice about how to get more engaged or look for opportunities on the islands in clean energy.
I would say don't try to have everything planned out from the beginning. You know, there's so many ways to get into clean energy. You don't have to be a scientist, you don't have to be an engineer. If you're interested in finance, get into, you know, clean energy financing. There are hedge funds that that are focused on clean energy. There are venture capitalist funds and organizations that, you know, are directed and specialize in clean energy funding. There's also, you know, clean energy companies that need financiers and accountants and things of that nature. You know, if you are a journalist or if you are a communications major, a lot of people are looking for policy advisors. They're looking for government liaisons. They're looking for communications experts, you know, communications departments for energy companies. So definitely don't think that there's only one way to get in. And then of course there's always, what am I saying? There's always government, like how I got in. I never would have thought that, you know, I was going to get into clean energy through the Virgin Islands Energy Office, even though I definitely was interested in moving the Virgin Islands towards a clean energy future. I never thought about the energy office and doing it through that way. But honestly, if Kyle hadn't been appointed as the director of the energy office by Governor Bryan, I probably would not have ended up at the energy office. I would say to find the thing that you enjoy and the thing that you're good at, and then try to find that skill in clean energy.
I definitely agree, kind of across the board on everything that Megan just touched on. I think it more and even more so on the standpoint of it's because it allows for so many different avenues for support and engagement. It really is so rewarding of creativity is what I felt in this industry. It's in, you know, for me, when I first got into it, when I started looking at energy, I was really more so looking at it from a solution standpoint, right? Like how do we bring up how do I get involved in a space that is always going to be in need of solutions, and I feel like the byproduct of that has been the solutions don't have this kind of singular path. You know, to Megan's point, like there's so many different ways, and the technology evolves so quickly. Whereas maybe early on it was okay, like how do we get hybrid vehicles together, and now like we're already past that. Right now it's like how do we get electric vehicles in every sector, in every location, in every market. And the industry changes so quickly, and I think it's just so rewarding for those who maybe feel like, okay, I don't want to get bogged down and locked into kind of one trajectory. This is like an industry that it inherently evolves so quickly that even if whatever area you get into and stick through, you're going to have opportunities to shift and pivot into different sectors, right? I mean, even within our agency, we touch on everything from transportation to storage to renewables and how all of those get deployed. And there's so many different ways that we're able to engage at this level to try to bring about different solutions. So I can't echo enough that there doesn't have to be a clear path to it. I think it's being aligned with trying to align yourself in creative problem and solution oriented type of interest and passions, and it's a perfect industry to kind of apply yourself in.
I love both your answers, and it kind of leads to our listeners are also very passionate about causes, and I feel like the Virgin Island Energy Office is punching above its weight in terms of what you guys have been doing, and maybe flying under the radar for a lot of people. And it just seems like you guys are doing a great job. Where can our listeners learn more about VIEO? Where can they go to website wise, and also anything that they can do to really help your cause and raise awareness? Let us know, where can they go get more information?
So our main source of quick information is on our Facebook page. As everyone's social media oriented, that's our most expedient way to get information out there. And our Facebook page is VIEO, Virgin Islands Energy Office. I can't stress enough that VIEO has to go in front before, because we have a duplicate page that we've unfortunately not been able to get taken down. But VIEO, Virgin Islands Energy Office, Facebook, and then energy.vi.gov, and that's V as in Virgin Islands, vi.gov, is our website, which we do update. We do keep that fairly consistently updated, but then our Facebook page, again, it's definitely a more dynamic, definitely more fluid space for our information about the things that we're doing. In terms of ways they can support, I mean, actually, this is probably one of the better ways in getting our messages out. And then we're always trying to push the public information piece, both locally, and this certainly helps at a broader scale. We're always looking for strategic partners. One of the things that we've looked at, especially with this huge influx in federal funds, it's unrealistic for our 14 staff agency to ever execute on all the projects that we have funding available for. So always looking for strategic partners in the form of consultants, subject matter experts, technical strategic partnerships as well, to bring these solutions expeditiously to the territory as well too. So those are some of the areas. And Megan, I don't know if you have some other thoughts on that as well.
No, I was just going to say, we do also have an Instagram, which is Virgin Islands Energy Office. Definitely please follow us. Even if you mute us, it's fine. Just follow us, because, the more followers we have, the more people see our page and who actually need to see it and should see it, and can benefit from our information locally.
This is great. I mean, I just want to say I'm really happy that I don't normally have good ideas. So the fact that I reached out to you guys, I'm so happy we did it, because, I think when you go to a place like St. Croix, it's easy to just go and have a vacation, sip your drinks and enjoy the beach. But I think when you start integrating yourself a little bit into the culture and really meeting wonderful people, you see that this is such a great treasure of the American economy. And the fact that you guys are doing so much with so little right now is really inspiring to all of us. And, I hope that you guys have great success, and I hope maybe we can check back in with you guys over the coming months and years as you guys keep growing your mission. And, anything we can do to help, we'd be happy to.
I would love that. And can I just say thank you for being the person who actually, looks into and below like the surface level of the tourist experience. You are my favorite kind of tourist. Thank you.
Well, I gotta say, first off, Lucas, you're gonna have to come with us next time, okay? Because I think I was a little bit jealous. And secondly, I have to say, while this was the number one kind of side effect of our vacation, number two, I found out that the little place we were staying at in St. Croix, that little cove, is where they filmed the last scene of the movie Trading Places. And that was one of my all-time favorite movies as an ex-financier. So that just even made it that much more special. So
Yeah.
But is it I think you might appreciate, is it Dan Aykroyd? Was he in that movie, or was that?
Yeah, Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy, when they did the Feeling Good, Lewis, and I can't remember the rest of the line, but that was filmed in St. Croix. Never would have thought that, but
Dan Aykroyd just moved to St. Croix last year.
That's true.
Permanently.
There you go.
There you go. That's a good living. So
from what
like the farmers
rumor is, the
market
Trading Places
randomly, it's great.
was the motivation for that.
well, I feel like a public service announcement for the VIEO should be done by Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy. We got to make that happen.
I think we might be able to make that happen. Megan, you're connected to him, right? He comes to your shows.
Yeah, he does.
We'll
I
get
don't
him
think
on.
he came to my last one. Yeah, no, yeah, he's come to the Virgin to the Caribbean Community Theaters shows. Yes, I am an actor and an artist, and I am a senior energy engineer in my free time. No, but yeah, there's yeah, it's fun to have people here, and when Biden is here, it's fun to have him here too.
Oh yeah, he's a fan. He and Jill are fans. So,
Mm.
listen, Megan, Kyle, thank you so much for spending some time with us today, and we look forward to speaking with you in the future.
Thank you guys. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the time.
Thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
And when you do come back, please let us know. We can give you the local tour.
Done. I mean, Lucas, we could write it off on our taxes.
There you go.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys again. Well, Lucas, I thought that was just really probably one of the most, how do you say, warm-hearted conversations we've had on the show. I think we had two guests on there that really care about the job that they're doing because they see the impact immediately.
Yeah. And the islands are a perfect laboratory for clean energy because, like I said, the price of electricity is astronomical there. It's 3, 4, 5, 6 times higher than in the States. And so it's a perfect place to substitute, early technologies that are maybe a little pricey for us, make perfect sense for them.
Well, and also I love the fact that they're focusing on energy efficiency because we just don't do enough of that in the mainland. And energy efficiency makes sense in so many ways. And so I think they could be a prototype of great technologies being implemented. And then you take those technologies and deploy them in the mainland. I thought they were great.
I mean, just to go on the record, I think we do a lot of energy efficiency, but I think it's like you said, it's just not sexy. So nobody talks about it. Nobody points to it. We moved to LED bulbs. It took like an industry ban, which I thought was heavy-handed and ridiculous, but we save so much energy on lighting nowadays, and nobody mentions it because it's not sexy, like you said.
Fair enough. But I don't think, I think if there was a little bit more of a push in efficiency, we can even have that much more savings. And I just want to say, hey, to you frickin' tourists, American tourists in the Caribbean, drunk driving your rented Jeeps, okay? Quit hitting the effing telephone poles, okay? Because they don't say it, they're too polite to say it, but it's tourists.
Oh, I was super happy to hear that she's well-versed in distribution utility problems. That was a good sign to me.
I hate to say it, I think she's coming after your job on Pirates, man, because she explained the grid in the most simplistic terms that made sense for me.
Yeah, I don't think people really think about distribution at all, unless it's tree trimming, and we complain about outages and tree trimming. And that's it.
That's where I do have sympathy for the utilities, right? Because they have to maintain a distribution system, and everyone thinks it's the enemy, but it's not, and they need.
Man, I'd really love to do like some crazy distribution system design there that gives them some resiliency. Because if they really do have hub and spoke, then there's nothing you can do. I mean, a line goes down, you're stuck, and they could use, like she said, more of a spider web setup.
Well, I'll tell you what, how about getting 4 or 5 of the biggest utilities in the United States together to pull some money and to do beta testing on an island economy like St. Croix or St. Thomas,
or just bid for existing funds. Yeah,
I agree. Listen,
it wouldn't take that much money.
It wouldn't. No, exactly right. And your point is dead on. Like, it would just take a little bit of money, and you've got the resources, a small island with high electricity prices.
Right.
You can really test and generate a positive return on these technologies. So
how much would it cost to run a couple of extra distribution lines and, double or triple their downtime,
Exactly right.
Okay.
Well, listen, we decided not to do articles because that conversation went long, and we know you are a fickle group of listeners on our podcast. You don't want to spend an hour and a half with us, and we don't blame you. So we'll do articles next week. We have some great guests that we're starting to line up for the season. So I'm excited. Fucking up, look, we've got them. We're bagging them.
doing that to me. All right.
And by the way, folks, we didn't really talk about any public companies on this one, but obviously when we do, we're not making any recommendations on the underlying securities of those companies. So before you make any investment decision, please talk to a registered expert investment advisor and don't listen to us.
Yep. And you can find us on your favorite podcast venue. You search for Pirates of Clean Tech. Let all your family and friends know that if they want the real stuff on clean energy and clean tech, they need to listen to Pirates of Clean Tech. We're also on YouTube if you want to follow along. We got to look at the US Virgin Islands Energy Office website and Facebook page today. So definitely recommend YouTube. Hit the subscribe and the like button.
It was a great episode. Lucas, thank you so much for kind of listening to me when I was down in St. Croix and listening to my crazy ideas. I think these are great guests, and I feel like you and I have to road/boat trip to the islands sometime next year and do a remote broadcast.
Yeah, definitely. I haven't been to the US Virgin Islands. I've been to the British Virgin Islands.
Oh, I've been to St. Croix twice now, and both experiences have been wonderful. So
yeah, it's on my to-do list. So let's do it.
With that, I'm Eric Planey.
I am Lucas Finco.
And we are truly the pirates in the Caribbean. Clean tech. Yar, yar, yar.
Part 2.
Yar 2.
The sequel.
Dose yar.